Keeping It Young podcast is sponsored in part by TWR360.org, giving the world powerful Christian content in more than 100 languages. Visit TWR360.org, the global internet platform of Trans World Radio. If you could find an inexpensive, user-friendly tool to help you and your church family in scheduling volunteers, think nursery workers, cleanup crews, and so forth, wouldn't you be interested in knowing more about such a tool? Finding workers and creating a perfect schedule can take an enormous amount of time, and one small cancellation can throw everything off sync. Well, a friend in our ministry built a tool for use in his local church, a tool that makes scheduling super easy. You just set up your task, you enter the volunteers, and literally click one button to automatically build a fair schedule. It considers all scheduling conflicts, vacations, and even makes sure that volunteers are fairly spread so that no one is overused. It handles all the notifications as well. It is so user-friendly that volunteers can handle conflicts simply by logging on, locating a substitute, and swapping with another user, and the program handles the approval and updates everyone's schedule automatically. It's really quite amazing how you can go from a new blank schedule to a fully populated, fairly balanced schedule in one click. And I imagine this could save you or someone at your church a lot of time. Our friend built this program for his own church, but it was so well received that other churches began using it as well. It's now available to you. It's called The Church Crew. Pay them a visit at thechurchcrew.com. It's completely free to try it out and see how powerful it is and how it can help your church family. Again, that's thechurchcrew.com. And when you visit them, thank them for supporting us here at the Keeping It Young podcast. Welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
And we are the Youngs.
Welcome back.
Hey, everybody. We're glad you joined us again this week. And we are right in the middle of a book called The 5 Love Needs of Men and Women by Dr. Gary and Barbara Rosberg. And we hope you enjoyed our beginning of that series last week as we talked about unconditional love.
Yes.
This is one of those books where I think I liked the book a little more than Bethany did. So as far as our views of the book, but we both enjoyed reading it. It's practical. It just gives a ton of practical wisdom, practical advice, and some hope in case you're going through some challenging situations. And just a reminder that the book was researched with 700 different couples, and the men were asked, what are your top 5 love needs out of 40? And the ladies were asked the same question, and then they wrote this book based on the top 5 from the men and the top 5 from the women.
Right.
Both men and women listed unconditional love as the number one need that they had.
Very top.
And then this week, let's go a step further, because the second one, they listed the same word, but interesting enough, with 2 very different meanings.
Very different meanings.
Absolutely.
And let us just give you a heads up right now. If you have little ones listening, you might want to pop in your earbuds or maybe listen later while they're taking a nap. We will not be overly frank. The book was not overly frank.
But there are a couple of words we'll use that you just want to be wise with your children. And so the word was intimacy. Both husbands, the second, what is your number 2 need? And men mentioned intimacy. That was their number 2. Ladies, number 2, they listed intimacy.
Yes. And
that's kind of interesting. Did you find that interesting that both put that one in there?
I did.
And were you surprised by the differences in the 2 views?
Not at all.
Yeah, me either. And I think some couples probably are, because we have this tendency in our culture to assume that you ought to be like me. And that everybody's like me.
Right.
And that my wife ought to be like me, or my husband ought to be like me. And yet this is just one of those areas where it's very obvious when God designed husbands and men, and when God designed women, he designed us differently.
Right.
Our culture doesn't like that. And our young people are being taught that is just not true.
Right.
But it is one of the lies of our culture.
It is. What was interesting to me is that both men and women could choose this word out of the list of 40 things and mean something totally different.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what they meant differently. For husbands, when they mentioned the word intimacy, they were referring to intimacy sexually.
Right. Physically.
Physically. So I suppose most men would understand that. This is, probably not true of every man, but it certainly is true for a great majority.
Right.
And then wives, when they listed the word intimacy, they meant it in 2 ways. They meant it emotionally and conversationally.
Right.
Now, you that are married, do you find that interesting at all? Or you that aren't married, but you've been in a dating relationship, or you're a young man or a young lady, can you see that men and women see things so differently there? Whereas it's just the culture makes fun of this kind of stuff, and yet God designed us differently.
Right.
And I think that's just so interesting.
It is. What I find interesting is that the women chose the word intimacy, because surely out of 40 different titles or subjects or whatever, there was something that would have given them the sense of emotional closeness to my husband, or conversational closeness with my husband, or even just the word communication, instead of choosing the word intimacy. Because I think if I looked at a list of things, what are my top things, and I saw the word intimacy, I would equate it with the bedroom. Maybe it's because we read so many books about the bedroom,
Sure.
and we have done episodes about the bedroom. So I probably would have chosen a different word. But I do understand where these ladies are coming from.
And here's a quote from the book. And this I thought was really good. Men spell intimacy S-E-X. Women spell intimacy T-A-L-K.
Yes.
For men, intimacy is sex. For women, intimacy is talk. Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that's true?
It is, because I know for women, before you can get to the bedroom part of intimacy, we do like that emotional connection of communication, at least at some point during our day.
Sure. So he writes the first section to the wife. Mm-hmm. And as he's writing to the wife, he does try to explain to wives why this is such an important need to men. Mm-hmm. And here's a couple of things. He said that we have to understand that a man finds much of his masculinity in his sexuality. Mm-hmm. And one author even said no less than 50% and up to 90% of a man's self-image, his feeling like a man, his own view of himself as a man, no less than 50% and as much as 90% is connected to his sexuality. The word he even used was it's locked up in his sexuality. And that's a strong 90%. And I think for a lot of ladies, they probably don't see that need as that strong to their husband. Would you agree with that, maybe?
I just feel like you are such an accomplished man all the way around that surely there is more that boosts your ego than our intimate life. But
Good answer, my love. Good answer.
but I could also see where that if that part of a marriage is less than satisfactory for a man, or if it's struggling, that it could make him feel less than a man.
Yeah, and I have observed in counseling and things that when this part of the marriage isn't up to par, this need is not being met in a man's life, mm-hmm. it does discourage him, it does frustrate him, and it does affect him negatively.
True.
And so that part is undeniable. And the author said this: when his needs aren't met, he responds in one of three ways. Okay, and so ladies, this is written to you. First of all, it says he feels rejected. And I guess that's just kind of a given, isn't it? I mean, right. That would make sense. He feels rejected. The second one is he shuts down. And here's the quote. Let me see if I can say this right. What do wives do? Well, in fact, I guess I got to give the pre-sign here. So when a man withdraws, here are some of the signs. He won't go to bed with you or when you do for fear of another rejection. He'll quit trying to romance you with flowers or dates because you've sent out the message that when he does that, he only wants one thing. He'll work longer hours because he won't have time to think about the emotional distance then between you and him. He'll absorb himself in recreation or activities with the kids or TV, anything to numb the pain of the expectations that were never fulfilled. And so here's what he says. What do wives do when this happens? Sadly, most welcome the relief. So most are like, you know what? This is good. They figure, and this is a quote, they figure that they've successfully trained their husbands to be satisfied with the infrequency. He's gotten used to my sexual clock, and everything is now as it should be, is how most wives think. Some wives rationalize that sex isn't like her food or air. He doesn't actually need it. And I guess there's a sense in which that's true. So that's not a totally incorrect thing. It's not like you can't live without it. But for the marriage relationship to function well, it is an essential. And you would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So he's just talking about, here's what happens. A man feels rejected or he shuts down. He just simply shuts down. Or he looks outside of marriage for his needs to be met. And I'm going to go on a limb and say something here. Some men excuse sexual sin by saying, well, she's not meeting my needs, therefore I have this right.
Right.
But brothers, I'm going to tell you, men, I'm telling you, it is always wicked. It is always wrong. It is always damaging to you, to your marriage, to your family, to everyone involved when you take liberties with sexual sin.
Yes.
No matter what that is, if it's pornography, if it's adultery, any form of fornication, whatever it is, when you take that liberty, you are sinning against God, and it will not solve the issue. In fact, it will complicate it. It will just absolutely make things so much worse, far worse than you can ever imagine.
Right.
And so the question then is, okay, so what can a wife do? All right. So you got the list there?
I do.
What can a wife do? Let's get this going.
First of all, she can talk to God about the issue. And I do feel strongly about this. I tell women all the time who are struggling with physical intimacy in their marriage, I tell them their first place they should go is to the Lord Jesus, because he created marriage, he created physical intimacy, and he apparently is for it as much as it's talked about in the scripture. And he wants your marriage to be loving, to be thriving. And so, of course, he's going to be interested, and of course, he can help you. So I would say, first of all, go to the Lord and just say, you know what, we're struggling, or maybe I'm struggling with this. My husband really would love for this area of our marriage to be thriving, and I'm not as on board with that as I should be. And so, Lord, I'm asking you to change my thoughts, change my heart. Just help me.
I'm curious, when you share that with ladies, how do ladies respond to that? Is that seen as a positive thing, or is it like, are you serious thing?
Most ladies actually, they kind of light up in a way, in two different ways. First of all, in my goodness, I had never thought of that before, of asking the Lord to help me with my intimate life. And then secondly, it's almost like a lifeline, like, oh, this really could help me, because it is true that generally speaking, not every couple, but generally speaking, the husband will be more interested in this part of intimacy than the woman. And it can get into maybe a bad habit of the wife rejecting her husband over and over again because she's not as interested. So when I tell them, you know what, you can go to the Lord and he can put that in your heart, they just kind of light up like, oh, good. I have the most powerful Almighty on my side.
Yes. That's really interesting. So he says to the wife, you can talk to God about the issue. And he also says you can start with your own heart.
Yes.
Now, do you agree with that as well?
I do.
And can you explain that to what do we mean by that?
Well, sometimes, not always, and this is again generally speaking, but sometimes the issue is not so much that we are the wife is too tired, not feeling well, has a headache, whatever. I mean, could those all be part and parcel? Yes, they can.
Sure.
Do we get too tired? Yes. Do we have physical difficulties? Yes. Different things like that. Do we go through seasons and cycles where our sexual drive can be at an all-time low? Yes. All of that can be true. But by and large, usually if we're rejecting over and over and over again, there is either a root of bitterness or something in our heart towards our husband that we do not want to open up in that way, or it could also be that we're just being selfish. So to take it to the Lord and to say, okay, Lord, what is it that's keeping me from being loving to my husband in this area?
Okay, that's very good. And so he gives two others here. He says, what can a wife do? He says she can learn what satisfies her husband and then commit to meeting his needs. So there's 4 points there. Talk to God, start with her own heart, learn what satisfies him, and commit to meeting his needs. And under this idea of learning what satisfies her husband, he says a wife should study her husband's sexual rhythm. You know, does she know this? And I've wondered, sometimes I think when we counsel couples in this area, or talk to couples about this when they're struggling, is that typically the rhythm becomes a source of disdain rather than a source of desire. Meaning, don't you think that a lot of the couples we talk to, they're like, oh my word, I can't believe she wants this, or oh my word, I can't believe, oh my word, I can't believe, instead of, well, he has this need, I'm going to see if I can meet it.
Right.
So it's a difference in thinking, isn't it?
It is.
And even love and service of each other in this regard.
Right.
And he says in the book, he said, how do you find out what satisfies your husband? And this is what he said. Do you agree with this? You watch him and you ask him.
Yes.
Is it that simple?
It is. I would say having a conversation is, besides prayer, then your second line of, okay, what do I do? Just sit down and have a conversation and just ask him. And we were in a couples retreat a year or two ago in Colorado, and the pastor's wife encouraged the ladies to ask their husbands, what would be a best case scenario for you if we were to be intimate this many times a week, month, whatever? What's your best case scenario? And she did tell the ladies, you need to be prepared because it's probably a higher number than what you're thinking. But she said, at least then you will know what is in your husband's heart. And ladies, I guarantee you, he probably would be very happy to tell you, because especially if he thinks it's something that you're working on.
Yeah, and if you feel that's a sincere question.
Yes.
For sure. So the first part there is that men feel this need for intimacy, spelled sex. Mm-hmm. But then the second part is written to the husband, and it's about how that women's, their idea is this matter of talk,
Right.
Talk, emotional intimacy.
Yes. Let's connect emotionally.
Are they right? Are you thinking all the ladies are putting that right? Do you agree with that?
I would say, at least generally speaking, most women want that emotional connection, that conversation, because then they already feel connected to their husbands and they are more apt to be open to the idea of physical intimacy.
Absolutely.
It just kind of flows from that for a lady.
So here's a quote, and men, this is written to you. And the author says, you feel less masculine if your wife doesn't meet your need for intimacy. Mm-hmm. She feels like a machine if she doesn't experience sexual intimacy flowing from emotional intimacy. In other words, she feels used.
Yes.
Is that you think what they're meaning there?
Yes.
Yeah. And so here's a quote from the book, straight from the quote. And let me read this to you. The author says, our emotions, talking about ladies now, our emotions are connected to our thoughts, to our hearts, to our minds, and to our bodies. Mm-hmm. When one box is affected, there's a chain reaction that ultimately affects our spirits. For example, if a wife has a rough day with the kids or a coworker, her emotional tank will be depleted. As a result, her physical energy will be shot, and she may need to withdraw to regroup. Her parenting or workplace box is connected to her emotional box, which is connected to her energy box, which is connected to her relational box. And this is what the author said. Have you noticed how quickly your wife can recall a disappointing event that happened 3 years ago? and I laughed at that. And you even put a smiley face here. I saw that in the margin. Have you noticed how quickly your wife can recall a disappointing event that happened 3 years ago? That's also why she can remember exactly when you last gave her flowers. A woman's life events are all threaded together very carefully. And you agree with that?
Oh, yes.
Do you think the ladies in our audience would agree with that?
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
I love how she puts it, that if you've had disappointments throughout your day, for a woman, that is not just emotionally depleting, it is physically depleting. That's why girls have this, the whole thing about, oh, I've had a really rough day. I need chocolate. I need coffee. I need comfort food. And I need to just sit and binge watch my favorite chick flicks.
Or sometimes I just need to come cuddle.
Yes. Or sometimes, could you please give me a foot massage? Things like that, because everything is connected there. And, the husband might be thinking, we haven't been on your feet all day. Why do you need a foot massage? Well, because her heart is hurting. Yes.
Yeah. And for most men, that's foreign concept to them.
Yes.
And so, gentlemen, understanding that is so helpful, because here's the deal. Let's just say this to couples. The goal here is not to say, great, these are my needs, please meet them. Mm-hmm. The goal of the book is to say, this is your husband's need, and you have the wonderful privilege of meeting it.
Right.
And the goal is to say, this is my wife's need, and I need to learn how to meet it, and I have the wonderful privilege of meeting this need that my wife has.
Right.
And both of them, it's interesting that it is the same word. both in the second need, they feel like below unconditional love, just below unconditional love, they put intimacy. And they put that because both of us, it's all connected together. When the intimacy is that closeness, and for men, it is felt differently than for ladies.
Right.
But ladies, you have to understand why your husband needs that and what it means. And ladies, men, what they're trying to say is this is why your wife needs it this way. And we have to meet each other there. And when I serve Bethany and she serves me, when I'm trying to meet her needs, how God made her, and she's meeting my needs, how God made me, what you find out is you're on the path to a really happy marriage.
Absolutely.
And that's the point of this book. So what first of all, they said, what happens when a wife's needs aren't met in this area of emotional and conversational intimacy? Well, she withdraws.
Yes.
Or she will not feel free to respond to you sexually. Men highlight that statement.
Yes. And I wouldn't even say she will not feel free. She will not even feel like responding to you sexually.
She just has no desire for you at all.
Right.
When this need is not met. And then she may look elsewhere to have her needs met as well. And ladies, that is just as wrong as a husband committing adultery. It's wrong for a woman to commit adultery.
Absolutely.
Just as wrong as it is for a man to get involved in pornography, it's wrong for you to get involved in pornography.
Right. And I don't think these were put in the book. I mean, a lot of times I've heard ladies say, well, they just hold that over our heads as, oh, he's going to look outside of marriage. Or even a man could say, oh, she's going to look outside of marriage if these needs are not met. That's not the reason to put it in the book, is to hold it over your head and to beat you up with it. It is just to state a fact that it could happen. And as David was saying, there is no excuse for any sin that
Absolutely.
is just because your husband or wife isn't meeting a need.
So in the few moments we have left, let's just talk here a little bit. What can a man do? And here again, he gave 4, she gives 6. And I love this. Here's a quote. Speaking of the emotional and conversational intimacy, listen to this quote. It's from page 87 in the book. A woman is eager to hear about the smallest details in your life, from what you ate for lunch to what you would lay your life down in defending. She wants to know what you're thinking and how you think, and she wants you to do the same for her. Now, here's the question. Is that true?
Oh, yes.
So ladies want details.
They do.
Ladies want details. So here's the list. The author says, listen, you can listen to her.
Yes.
Listen to her. Just listen. Show her an understanding heart, gentlemen. Show her an understanding heart. That means you're not only just listening, you're involved in the listening. You're attempting to understand. You're identifying with what she's saying and what she's feeling.
Right. You're not scrolling on your phone saying,
As something I would never do.
or me.
Give her attention and affection.
Yes.
Build, and I love this one, build rapport with her. And this is what the author said. This was so good. The author said that men report and women rapport, R-A-P-P-O-R-T.
Yes.
Men report, in other words, men speak in highlights.
Yes.
The key word is highlights. Whereas women rapport, the key word is details.
Yes.
And that I think really is, they're onto something there, don't you?
Well, that's what the quote was all about. So that if you do have a connection time outside of the bedroom, maybe you're going on a date, or maybe you're just sitting down to talk a little bit throughout the day, of course, your wife can probably fill that whole time with talking to you, but she also wants to hear from you, and she wants to hear more than that your day was fine.
And it is amazing how different we are about that. This week I had lunch with my pastor, and when I came home, my wife said, she said, how did it go? And I was like, it was good. She said, oh, tell me everything. Tell me everything. And I laughed because it reminded me of this book. Bethany wanted to know everything.
Yes.
And, what'd you talk about? And what did pastor say? And how did you feel? And what did he think? And what do you think? And quite honestly, typically your friend won't catch you like that. A guy buddy won't say to you, tell me everything.
Right.
But your wife will. And part of meeting her need for intimacy is that rapport, giving of the details. And when you're giving rapport, the author said this, remember that complaints are not attacks. And I thought that was really good because they added it, they followed it up with this. Complaints are not attacks. Women believe that if a marriage is working, they can talk about it.
Yes.
And men believe if the marriage is working, they don't have to talk about it.
Right.
And that can put a little difference there. So because God put me in Bethany's life, I don't have to give the details of my life to other ladies. That wouldn't even be right or wise to do. But Bethany's my wife, and she has a need to feel intimate emotionally and conversationally with me.
Right.
And for me to do that, then I have to listen to her. I have to listen with an understanding heart. And I have to rapport with her by adding details and giving details. And, quite frankly, husbands, it's something we have to work at as men. It's not natural to us. It's not necessarily the way we would do it, but it is a need my wife has. And if I'm going to if I'm going to be able to meet her needs of intimacy so that I empower her to meet my needs for intimacy, then both of these things have to happen.
Right.
And it's an important thing to understand that. So you build rapport with her. What's a couple of others there?
Resolving conflicts. That's all part of intimacy for a woman. If she knows that there is a conflict, or she's gotten her feelings hurt, or maybe you've gotten your feelings hurt, she wants to talk about it and she wants to resolve it. And I know that can be sometimes difficult.
Right.
So if you're struggling with that, we do have episodes about
conflict resolution. And we'd
Yes.
recommend those.
Yes.
The author did say that handling negative issues in a negative way results in our wives fighting. When we as men handle negative issues in a negative way, our wife will either fight, flee, or freeze. And I think that's true.
I thought you were just about to say,
I've seen that occasionally.
I've experienced this.
But that would mean that I was the one handling the negative issue in a negative way. And so, yes,
We will
unfortunately.
be practicing some conflict resolution as soon as we're done recording.
So I have experienced this, brothers. And the last one here is you have to safeguard your relationship.
Yes.
One of the ways what can a husband do? A husband has to safeguard his relationship. And that's an important one, because the world we live in, where sex is just considered, everybody does it, and adultery is normal, and affairs are normal.
Right. Well, even in a culture where coworkers, guys and girls, will go out to lunch together, just the man, just the woman, that would be cause some uncertainty, I think, in some wives' hearts if their husband was consistently having lunch with one certain lady in the office or whatever.
Yeah, and he mentions this here about safeguarding your relationships. He says, to put it bluntly, it is easy for a man to begin capturing another woman's heart without even realizing it. You think you're just having an enjoyable conversation with a coworker, but she may see it as the only attention she's had all week. And before you know it, your conversations move from friendly chatter to intimate subjects. I'm not suggesting you can't have friendships with other women. I'm only warning you that it's easier than you think to capture the heart of another woman outside of your marriage. Now, in the margin, as you were writing this or reading this, you wrote this in the margin beside of that statement there. You wrote, "Yep, things that escape you," smiley face. And do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I just know within our ministry, we travel all the time. We meet all kinds of people. And of course, we want to be warm and friendly to everyone. And a lot of people like to come and talk to us about some of the probably deepest burdens on their heart.
Sure.
And I know that, well, first of all, I love the safeguard that David has put in place in our ministry, whereas he almost across the board will say, I don't counsel women. I have Bethany counsel you and I will counsel your husband. But there are times where either he is talking to a husband and wife together, or maybe us together or talking to them together. Or maybe I'm just not available. Maybe I'm talking to someone else and I'll come out in the lobby and he'll just be listening to someone and then maybe responding. And of course we want to respond in a biblical way and in in a lovingly truth-filled way. And so David is just, trying to be very careful with this lady. And I can just tell that she's just looking at him like, you are the most amazing thing I have ever met. And so I'm just like, no, he's my most amazing thing.
And my wife will make a beeline and take me by the arm and join the conversation.
Yes.
And it's one of the benefits of throughout my ministry, I've tried very hard not to travel alone. Mm-hmm. And we've almost always gone together, or I've had another team member go with me.
Right.
And that's changed some in recent years, but the fact of the matter is it's really helped in our marriage relationship.
Right. But I said things that escape him is that David does not even realize that this lady is thinking, man, I wish my husband had this kind of spiritual truth coming out of him. And I understand, or at least my heart goes out to them. But at the same time, I do try to safeguard.
Absolutely. And we'll close with this. He says in the book, a word of advice, trust your wife's instincts in this area. Actually, she says this, a word of advice, trust your wife's instincts in this area. If she suggests that another woman is behaving inappropriately, your wife is right. Mm-hmm. And I think I agree with that.
I do too.
So men, what you've got to do is listen to your wife. And if she's concerned about a relationship you have with a woman, I'm going to say this gently, then you're a fool if you don't take that seriously.
Right.
Because if she's concerned, you should be concerned.
And I would say vice versa. If
Absolutely.
Your husband is concerned that
Absolutely.
you are a little too chummy with someone outside of your marriage, then you should take that seriously
Absolutely.
too.
So we're discussing the book called The 5 Love Needs of Men and Women. And you ought to get a copy. You ought to read it. It's practical. It's simple. It's easy to read. It won't take you long. And yet it's full of good advice and hope for your marriage. This is Keeping It Young. We're so glad you joined us today and hope you'll reach out if we can help you in any way. In the meantime, this week, serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.